Long before the reign of our glorious Karl Franz, the bloodthirsty tribes of the North united and invaded the Empire of Man. The Great War against Chaos raged on, up until Magnus the Pious rallied the citizens of Nuln, resisted the enemy, and defeated the Chaos leader, known as the Everchosen, scattering the invaders in the process. But the forces of Chaos have crawled back from the shadows to strike at the Empire. Unless something is done, the Empire of Man will again descend into darkness and turmoil.
Well, that was exciting, wasn't it? Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with my usual Skyrim background music whenever I'm going to be talking for a while. And let me start off by saying, before I get into this, you're probably going to want to grab something to drink because I might be talking for a very long time in this video. I've got my water here with me. In any event, today is finally the day I'm going to be talking about Chaosbane. So for those of you who are fans of Warhammer, and if you are, have been presumably living under a rock, one of the most exciting upcoming projects based in the Warhammer Fantasy Universe is, of course, Chaosbane. This is an action RPG that takes place in the Warhammer Fantasy Universe about 220 years before the quote-unquote modern day of Warhammer Fantasy. Or if you play the Total War games and that's kind of your connection to Warhammer, Chaosbane takes place roughly 200 years before you would start a campaign in Total War Warhammer. As in Total War, all the campaigns kind of align with starting as Karl Franz is elected as the new emperor, which happened in 2502. Chaosbane takes place roughly in 2303. In any event, as an action RPG, it's very, very similar to like Diablo 2, Diablo 3, Path of Exile, if that's your thing. Which is good, especially with the way that the Diablo franchise seems to be going. So I'm glad I have this to look forward to. So let's kind of get into what kind of game it is, and then I'll talk more about like the lore and the setting. So what we know about the game so far is that it has a lot of really interesting options. They've got some ambitious designs for the game that I really hope pay off. For instance, they've talked about that it's going to be coming to PC and console at the same time, I believe. I know they're developing them side by side, so it's not like they're designing it for PC and then it's being ported over to console or vice versa, which is a really nice thing. Plus, the game allows you to play with people that are on console or on PC, so it's not like they're going to be separating the player base into two different categories, which is also very nice. And finally, the game allows for couch co-op, which is a very, very rare feature in today's world, unfortunately, so I'm glad they're doing it. Whether you're playing on PC or on a console, which the PC part in this is very cool, you could have 4 players all hooked up to the same screen to enjoy the game. That is very rare, and I'm very glad to hear it. In any event, the only other things that I really want to go into in this game is that if you're not familiar with those types of games, they're kind of about just fighting hordes of enemies with really cool, customizable, powerful characters. Usually they have like crazy boss fights. They tend to have very in-depth loot systems if they're well designed. Hopefully very in-depth skill customization if they're well designed. And usually these games tend to feature on having a story that's pretty decent and then having a well-developed end game that's kind of just about having fun, enjoying the mechanics, and grinding for loot. That's typically how these types of games work. I'm not exactly sure to what limit or detail Chaosbane will have a spin on that, but we'll have to see. We already know a couple things more interesting about the game. We know there are 4 characters planned for release. There is a Sigmarite Knight of the Empire, who's a veteran of the Great War. There is a Dwarf Slayer, who's kind of more of a melee DPS class as opposed to a tank, which is what the Knight is. There is a high elven mage, or perhaps an archmage, who is more of a ranged DPS class that probably focuses more on crowd control. And then there is a Wood Elf Waywatcher, who is also a ranged DPS class that focuses more on damage over time and trap abilities. So far, we've only seen footage of the High Elf Mage and the Sigmarite Knight, which the Sigmarite Knight is named Conrad Velen, I believe, and he has a whole video out about him, kind of showing off his abilities and such, which is very, very cool, and we'll look at that later on. In any event, that's kind of all the need-to-know stuff about the game right now. It's slated to release in the first quarter of 2019, so we should be getting a release date for it hopefully in the next month or 2 months. I am very, very, very excited for this game. They have been putting out little snippets of things, like they've been releasing small clips of the different enemy types. So we've seen like little 3D renders of like Great Unclean Ones, Nurglings, Plague Beasts, Chaosbane or Plague Beasts, which are Chaosbane with the Mark of Nurgle, the Mutilith Vortex Beast, if you're familiar with the Warriors of Chaos army book. A lot of really, really cool stuff. I've also seen a couple of Khorne demons, I think. I don't think they've featured Tzeentch or Slaanesh yet. But in any event, the game, much like Diablo 2, for instance, takes place in 4 acts. Each of the acts corresponds to a different area. So Act 1, to my knowledge, takes place in Nuln, which is the capital of the Empire at the time this game happens. Because Altdorf wasn't the capital yet. That would happen later. And there are 3 other areas. I know one of them is Prague, which is the Cursed City. And one of the cool things about this game is that they've confirmed that each area corresponds to a different chaos god. So, for instance, I think Nuln is corresponding to Nurgle, whereas Prague will probably be like Tzeentch, and then Khorne will be somewhere else, and Slaanesh will be somewhere else. But I'm really excited that each of the gods is kind of getting their own zone, because that hopefully means that each of those zones is going to have a really unique flavor, and is also going to have very unique enemies. They've already confirmed that I believe there's over 80, it's either 70 or 80 unique enemy types in the game, which is great. One of the things that I tend to really dislike about action RPGs is you'll get enemies, like not that many, like usually 20 or 30 different types, and then every time you go up a tier, you fight the same enemies, they're just like colored differently, or maybe they're a little bigger, or maybe they just kind of have a weird aura that changes their effect, but it's the same guy. You know, it's the same enemy type, and there's nothing really unique about it. I hate when they do that, so I'm hoping that this game really goes all out on just pulling all the creatures they can from, like, the Beastman, Warrior of Chaos, and Demon Army books, and maybe even the Skaven and Greenskin books eventually, if those aren't in the base game. In any event, that pretty much wraps up like the actual game part of it I want to talk about, just to give you an idea of like a baseline of where we're coming from on this. So now let's talk about the setting, which I'm really, really excited about. So like I said earlier, this takes place in roughly 2303 after the fall of Azavar Kul, which for those of you unfamiliar, much like Archaon, Azavar Kul was an Everchosen. He was the 12th, the one before Archaon. So an Everchosen is someone who has gathered the 4 great powers of chaos together under his banner. All of Demonkind and the Warriors of Chaos and typically Beastmen have signed up under him, and he goes on a big rampage to try and end the world. And Azavar Kul was actually a very successful Everchosen. He led an invasion of Kislev that destroyed the great city of Prague, which was considered to be impenetrable to enemies. Kolek Suneater, if you've watched my Legendary Lord video on him, played a pivotal role in this, in that he smashed open the colossal walls of Prague and let in the forces of chaos. It was turned into what became known as the Cursed City because after Azavar Kul sacked the city, he ordered his conclave of wizards to basically make it an offering fit for the dark gods. So what they did is they unleashed this colossal ritual that literally melded all of the survivors in the city into its very foundations. So their flesh, their souls, everything about them was melded into the city itself, turning it into a grotesque hellscape full of screams and horrible just other noises as the people there were basically tortured for all eternity. Even when Magnus the Pious, who was the emperor after Azavar Kul, came and like razed the city to the ground and helped the Kislevites rebuild it, it still kind of wasn't pure. There were still certain nights you could go out and there would be ghosts in the sidewalk, or the ground would move weird and you'd hear screams and stuff like that. Azavar Kul did a number on that place. In any event, like this video I showed at the intro states, Azavar Kul was defeated by Magnus the Pious and his allies at the Battle of the Gates of Kislev. Now, humanity did not defeat them alone. They had the aid of the dwarves, who a large congregation had marched to Kislev before Kul arrived, led by High King Alricson, though he was mortally wounded in the conflict and would die years later, but he was wounded badly enough that the only reason he didn't die is he was too stubborn until an heir was chosen, which was, of course, High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer, who you should all be very familiar with. The elves also participated in the Battle of the Gates of Kislev, as Teclis, along with 2 other archmages and a small bodyguard, had left Ulthuan after the Battle of Finneval Plain and had come to lend their aid to the Empire. Now, this was significant because it was the first real time in Warhammer's history that men, elves, and dwarves stood together, united against chaos, and it's the only reason they were able to win. There were, of course, other forces in play, both evil and good, that kind of had effects on the battle. The Lizardmen, for instance, sort of participated in the Battle of Kislev, in that the Slann strengthened using the Geomantic Web, strengthened the Great Warding, which is like a series of ley lines across the world in like a grid, and they basically strengthened it so that the winds of magic weren't blowing as strongly in Kislev, and the forces of chaos, the demons, were basically not able to materialize in the numbers they would have been able to normally. So the Slann helped significantly with the good guys winning that battle. The Wood Elves even participated a little bit in that they didn't help with the Battle of the Gates of Kislev, but they did help with the Battle at Finneval Plain a little bit. They kind of had a impact on the battle in that they helped Tyrion when he took the Everqueen and was fleeing from the greater demon of Slaanesh, Nakari, who had been released by Malekith to hunt the 2 of them down. The Wood Elves distracted him quite a bit and managed to keep Tyrion safe for quite a while. In any event, so with all of that kind of stated, this was a busy time in the Warhammer world because a lot of things happened very suddenly. After Kul was defeated, all the forces of chaos scattered. Essentially, it was like if you have a bunch of roaches in a room and you turn on the light. Kul dying was basically that light being turned on. They all ran for the hills in every direction. Unfortunately, for all of the forces of order, that means that a lot of dastardly and horrible enemies went south into the Empire and began corrupting it from within, or leading out small war bands to raid isolated villages and just being a nuisance, whether they were beastmen, warriors of chaos, Norskins, you name it. So that explains why in this game the first battles take place, or the first map is essentially the sewers of Nuln, and it seems to, I believe it revolves around Nurgle and some sort of inner corruption plot, which is going to be really interesting to see how they develop it. In any event, as for the playable characters, we kind of talked about them already a little bit, the Dwarf Slayer and all that. I am very curious to see how the lore for this game is going to be written. They have said that they are bringing in one of the Black Library authors to help write the lore for this game. I believe it's Mike Lee, who is a Black Library author that if you read Black Library novels, you should be very familiar with. He wrote the Malice Darkblade series. So he's got a lot of good clout behind his name, and I really hope that he puts out a great story for us to enjoy. This has a lot of potential. One of the biggest failings, I guess, of Warhammer, in my opinion, is that typically after a lot of these really big battles, we don't really get to see a lot of the interesting aftermath. When Azavar was defeated, some really important stuff happened in the Empire. For instance, Magnus the Pious was elected Emperor, first of all, which was vastly important as there had not been an Emperor in a long time, because there had basically been a bunch of civil wars and the Empire just wasn't interested in behaving and teaming up anymore. You know, this was post Vampire Wars and all sorts of other nastiness. In any event, after Magnus became emperor, he founded the colleges of magic by asking Teclis to teach human wizards how to control their magic and be a force for good. Because at the Battle of the Gates of Kislev, he saw chaos sorcerers for the first time and realized, we don't have a way to defeat that. We need help. So Teclis agreed to found the colleges of magic, which is a huge deal that I would love to see the game explore. And Magnus also founded the Imperial Colleges of Engineering and Gunnery, which the Imperial Gunnery School is, of course, in Nuln, while the Imperial Engineering College is in Altdorf, if memory serves correctly. And both of these were huge contributing factors to the growth the Empire would experience over the years, because, once again, Magnus saw the effectiveness gunpowder weapons and unique designed war machines were having on the forces of chaos at the battles at the Gates of Kislev. And he was like, we need this, because through strength of arms alone, we cannot defeat the enemy. And of course, Magnus the Pious is the one famed for saying that the Empire's strength is built on faith, steel, and gunpowder. And eventually, I guess he just sort of slipped magic under the rug there. But in any event, I'm really excited to see how this game could explore how the Empire was changing during this time while it's dealing with these forces of evil. In addition to the fact that having a dwarf slayer and a wood elf waywatcher are some really interesting characters to bring into the fold. This game actually could provide the opportunity to explore how some of the races reacted to the fact that chaos had basically waxed full and yet been defeated anyway. We don't really know what the wood elves were doing after they pulled their little stunt in Ulthuan. We don't know why the Wood Elves didn't show up at the Battle of the Gates of Kislev. They must have known about it, but they decided not to show themselves. They decided to kind of maintain being in the shadows, so to speak. So I'm really hoping that the Wood Elf Waywatcher character could explore a lot of what Athelorn was doing during this time, and hopefully was a character that was actually sent by Ariel and Orion, and could have a really cool impact on the game. The High Elf Mage, I'm curious if that's going to be one of the Archmages that was traveling with Teclis, or if that's going to be like a new original character who just happened to show up during this time. Because Teclis, after defeating Asvar Kul, hung around the Empire for about 20 years, which he accomplished a lot of things, and that was mainly him taking the time he needed to not only set up the colleges, but to appoint the patriarch of each of them, determine, the system that governs them, and how to determine a supreme patriarch, and the dueling for that, and all that jazz. In any event, so we know Teclis is in the game, because there are some clips that show characters running around on, a quest or fighting, and in the top right, there's, a quest note that says, talk to Teclis. So, it sounds like, at least while you're in Nuln, that Teclis is going to be a character you have the ability to interact with. So I'm really excited for that, and hope they take the opportunity to use his lore to talk about the Battle of Finneval Plain, talk about maybe him fighting Nakari, the Greater Demon of Slaanesh, and of course the Battle of the Gates of Kislev, where he played a pivotal role. So that would be very exciting. In addition, one thing I really, really hope this game does is actually show us Magnus the Pious and actually have him interact with the player. One of the things that I hated about the Mark of Chaos series of games, which were a fantastic game with an expansion, Battle March, was that in the game you play Stefan von Kessel, who's a really cool character, and I really hope he makes a cameo in this game. In any event, Stefan von Kessel is your main character for the most part, and you deal with a lot of really cool things. You have a high elf buddy, and you even meet Teclis when playing through the game. You do meet Teclis, which is fine and dandy, but you don't meet Magnus. You actually only talk to his Reichsmarshal, who is an important character, and he's quoted in Total War Warhammer numerous times in the loading screens. I would not be surprised to see him make a cameo as well in Chaosbane. And that's one thing I really hope, is that Chaosbane gives some nods to the Mark of Chaos series. Especially since Mark of Chaos kind of wormed its way into being canon. You can find, if you open the Empire Army book and go to the timeline, you can find some parts, the Vampire Counts book. They actually talk about Stefan von Kessel fighting a vampire lord I think his name was Valdekir Rotep, but he was a vampire boss you fight in Mark of Chaos, and they kind of gave a nod to that. So the game's canon. So I'm genuinely hoping we see a lot of nods to that, either seeing the Vampire Lord, or maybe seeing like the Skaven or the Chaos Lord character, which of course the Mark of Chaos games are on my channel if you want to go watch them. They are old videos now, but they're very fun. A lot of people seem to have enjoyed them. In any event, so I'm really hoping we get to see Magnus. I'm hoping, they kind of give a nod to those games. And I really hope they explore the wider world, especially exploring the Empire during this time, to give us an insight into what it was like to survive against Chaos. One of the things I always hate about Warhammer a little bit is that, or one of my complaints with it, is that we don't often get to see the aftermath of a lot of these dramatic battles, which is important because, like I stated earlier, a lot of the forces of Chaos scattered and weren't slain and went into hiding and started influencing things. And this game seems to be almost explicitly about finding those sources of influence and purging them. And so I really am looking forward to getting a look at the dark side of war, and even when order triumphs, seeing the impact and corruption that makes Chaos so scary. Because sure, like the giant marching legions of warriors of chaos and demons and beastmen are terrifying, but it's usually what they do to the world and what they leave behind that makes them so incredibly sinister. That being said, I do hope this game allows you to be like crazy awesome heroes that have the ability to, fight destiny or fight fate and push back the darkness, and not just kind of be like, Vermintide, wonderful series of games that are great, but ultimately the characters' actions in Vermintide don't matter. They explicitly take place during the end times, and you're like fighting for like a few towns, and the world's ending anyway. You're not even delaying things for like a great future. They're delaying things maybe a few months before the world's going to come crashing down on them, or at least the moon. So Chaosbane, really hope that it plays up both the dark and light sides of Warhammer, the good and bad. The final thing I think I really have to say about this game is, so far, it seems like it's going for a mature rating, which I really hope is the case. I don't think it's really possible to make a game about Warhammer and keep it like PG or PG-13 and do it justice, if that makes sense. Like Total War Warhammer kind of gets away with it a little bit. Granted, they put in the blood, the Blood for the Blood God pack afterwards to kind of avoid some of the rating issues. But, they managed to get a lot of the gross and nasty stuff in the game. The Vampire Coast DLC had some horrific monsters. Hell Pit Abomination is disgusting. Like, they do a good job. Whereas, like, Vermintide is all about the gore and the ass beatings, and it's just sickening, and it's great. And I really hope Chaosbane embraces that, especially if they're gonna actually have a whole zone committed to Nurgle and Slaanesh, and I mean even Khorne and even Tzeentch. With Nurgle, I hope it's disgusting and horrible, and there's disease and suffering and just like grotesque bulbous bodies full of pus and putrescence and exploding corpses. Really hope they go ham on that. Tzeentch, I'm hoping for tentacles galore and screaming, monsters with thousands of mouths screaming in agony with teeth and lashing tongues and eldritch flames that change people colors and make them, warp spasm into horrible new forms, if they're even able to render that in the game. But I hope, like, Tzeentch goes crazy with the madness and tentacles and flesh molding, and then Khorne, we just get blood and more blood and maybe a little skulls and maybe some brass, but mostly just blood. And then for Slaanesh, well, I don't know how far they're willing to go for Slaanesh, but I hope they're willing to go a ways. Granted, Slaanesh is more than just the god of perversion. I feel like a lot of people just get hung up on the boobs part of Slaanesh, but there's a lot more to Slaanesh. I hope they have characters, I hope they are able to show off the fact that Slaanesh is all about things that are taken too far, things that are driven into excess, beauty to the form of excess, Slaanesh is everything artistic, just taken too far, like truly inspired and mind-blowingly beautiful architecture, but it's made out of bones and human sinew, or dances that are truly awe-inspiring to behold, but the dance is so devious and dangerous that it causes the person dancing its spine to snap or causes them uncontrollable agony. And I really hope they embrace Slaanesh and do a good job, because Slaanesh is just, quite frankly, a god that's never made it into a video game because a lot of people are scared of him, and I think, for ratings reasons, and they just, nobody even tries, in my opinion. Warhammer Age of Reckoning focused heavily on Tzeentch as the main focus, and they had touches of the other gods, but it was mostly just Tzeentch. Dawn of War focused on Khorne first, and then they had Nurgle, but they stayed away from Slaanesh. I think the most Slaanesh thing the Dawn of War series ever tried, the trilogy, was freaking like Noise Marines, which, yeah, that's Slaanesh, but that's pretty baby Slaanesh, some guys with just some like way too loud garage band rock. And then Mark of Chaos didn't even have much of a focus. Like they had Khorne and Nurgle as the only two patrons you could pick from, but even then, like, they were pretty tame. So I really, really, really hope that Chaosbane can push the envelope on taking us deeper into Warhammer. Based on the success of the Total War Warhammer trilogy, which granted we're only in game 2, and Vermintide, people seem to really love Warhammer right now. Like, it's a great fantasy setting. A lot of people are heartbroken, myself included, that it's a dead setting, unfortunately. It's finished, and Games Workshop is no longer supporting it. But, man, to be a Warhammer Fantasy fan now is a golden age, truly, because there are so many quality games. And I really, really hope that Chaosbane is going to be joining the likes of Vermintide 2 and Total War Warhammer 2 as, one of the kings of their respective genre, while also being a Warhammer title. Vermintide 2 is amazing at what it does, while also being amazing at Warhammer. Same can be said for Total War Warhammer. And I would love to see Chaosbane do well. From what I understand, Path of Exile is a very, very good game a lot of people like. It also is kind of overly complicated, in my opinion, based on the skill trees I've seen. So I don't want Chaosbane to quite go that far in the gameplay aspect. Maybe go a little further in the lore aspect instead. But, I do hope that it's more like Diablo 2 than Diablo 3. I hope that you can actually customize your character and play them very, very differently. And I hope they don't dumb the game down too much. I personally, I was not a fan of Diablo 3. I felt like they really dumbed the game down. It took a lot of the player's choice away from it, and you couldn't really customize your character in meaningful ways. So I'm letting my opinions get into this too much. In any event, so, like I said, Chaosbane is slowly but surely approaching release. They have a lot of really cool features that you can check out on their Twitter account, and I hope you guys will follow them. And if you're there, maybe follow me too. I've actually been using my Twitter. In any event, I think that's going to do it for me today. This was a very rambly video, so I apologize for that, but a lot has happened with this game, and I kind of wanted to air out my thoughts on it without worrying too much about focusing on like little written notes. I don't do videos in this style very often anymore because I find, to keep things short and concise, it's better to kind of just draw up some bullet points and just follow those. But for this, especially because it's my first video talking about it, I kind of wanted to do a little bit more freeform, so there you go. So I might have rambled or repeated myself, and if I did, I apologize. I hope you didn't mind too much. With that said, I think that's going to wrap us up for this video. I hope you all have a wonderful night. I will be releasing probably weekly, or at least once every 2 weeks, videos on Chaosbane, just to keep us updated on how the game's progressing, new information they've put out, new models they've put out, I will have links in the description and the top comment down below of their Twitter account, where you can watch their YouTube account, where you can watch their trailers, and you should definitely subscribe there and all that stuff. Hopefully, these guys have been very communicative, which is a pleasant surprise. So hopefully, maybe we can work something out with getting an interview with someone who's working for them, or, you know, get some kind of setup or like a Q&A session or something. I would really love to do that with these guys because, you know, this is the first one of these games that's been hardcore and deep development while my YouTube channel has been doing well and live. You know, by the time I started my channel, you know, Total War Warhammer was pretty much on the doorstep and was kind of the reason I started my channel, and Vermintide was kind of one of those things that swooped at me from the side, and I didn't have as much time to react to it. So yeah, I've talked for a long time. Hope you all have a great night. I'm going to go work on Carrick 8 Peaks week. So I hope you're all having a great day. Also, the Versus Part 2 video I'm doing with Turin will be out in a few days at the latest. I apologize it's taken so long. It took me too long to get together with Turin and record that and get it off to get edited. So I apologize. In any event, hope you all have a great day. Be seeing you around.